Hello, everyone. This is episode 35 of High Fantasy, or at least it better be because I was reading someone else's note that it was 35. Um,
I think Colin got it right.
okay, we hope so. We should really pay attention to our notes better. So, has anyone been productive since presumably 34?
Ish. I actually have written the scene I've been stuck on. I decided to completely scrap and rework, and it's actually working this time around. So that's exciting. So yeah, probably like 2,000 words maybe, but at least now the words are coming instead of just like 200 words and delete, then 200 words and delete.
Okay, that's good.
No.
You're too busy waiting to go to wherever you're going.
Cornwall and Wales.
Yeah. Mr. I'm cool.
Next Wednesday, a week from Wednesday.
Ooh.
So we need to. So we will either not have a show next time, or we will need to find a
guest.
Find a guest. Yes.
Just drag on the Dresden Crew and make it a Dresden Files High Fantasy episode.
You know, that might be the easiest option. Okay. I'll have to think about that. I have been thinking about being productive versus actually being productive.
If we're going to go on that, I'm on that page too, because I sit in front of a computer at work all day and think, this should be fun to put in my story. I read it.
Well, I was thinking about the urban fantasy story, which probably helps with this topic that we're doing today, and specifically how I want to try to draw it, because I don't know how to tell stories in pictures. I know how to do it with words. And then I get distracted because I want to do the coloring essentially with watercolors. And so I start watching a bunch of videos of how to do watercolor paintings. Like, oh, that's fun. 4 hours later, I've done nothing. Yeah. Also, I don't have the watercolors to work with. So it's like I can fantasize about working without actually having to commit to it.
It's funny how when you're at work, you fantasize about actually accomplishing something. And then when you get home, it's just, I'm tired.
Ugh.
Well, yeah, it's also like 7 hours later, you know.
So our topic is geography. We did previously do geography, and I think it was a bit more centered on
just
fantasy.
World building in general.
Yeah, kind of like this is how rivers work and the basic rules of gravity. So now we can do a little bit more talking about cities, I guess. Kind of the way we were leaning towards.
Well, cities, real, fictional, pros, cons of each, etc., etc., etc.
Talk about why cities are where they are, and
yeah. Okay, let me rattle off about Chicago because why not? Because my own urban fantasy, and it is totally not a Dresden ripoff, I swear. Chicago is on top of Lake Michigan, a gigantic lake, whole huge place of commerce. And that's where it started. It was a huge trading port. That's where most cities started.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, one thing you probably got to be really careful with is timing. So yeah, there's these major cities now, but if you go back too far, they weren't major cities, or they were a desert, like Dubai or something.
Oh, it is so funny to look at the population history of Arizona, or just Phoenix, because in the 50s, there's a huge spike, and that's when AC was developed.
Right. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, you got to be, if you're using a real city, you got to be careful with whatever you're looking at.
I was just reading Wheel of Time, and they've got a big port city called Tyr that's up the river. And the high lords of that city put a buildings tax on every town below them on the river, so that the more buildings in the town, the more taxes they are, because if they let any town downriver from them grow too large, then they'll take all the trade.
That makes sense. Yeah. Yeah. And it's, especially the size or city size is one reason why everything happens in New York City, because it's been a big city. There's all sorts of commerce and trade and all that kind of stuff there already, and always has been. So you can pretty much set any setting in New York City.
Yeah, and when you're talking, especially the urban fantasy genre of like, oh yeah, there's all sorts of monsters out there that eat people daily. It's like they're going to be able to hide in the big cities.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Especially if you set it like, turn of the century, like 1905 or whatever.
Such a fun time period.
Yeah, so you could set in like 1905 New York, and people are just dying,
I mean, there's just not enough police to keep
There's
track.
not enough police, but it's also like, especially the time period of if someone just wanted to up and leave town, they could. And no one would know they left besides them being gone. There isn't like Facebook or whatever, like, I've moved to California.
Yeah,
So it's a lot
basically
easier
up
to
until
manage.
internet, people could do that reasonably well up until like the mid 80s, I'd say.
I would say even past, I'd probably say even into like the late 80s, early 90s, you could probably get away with it, which is bouncing.
So you can
It's
kill off people
harder,
with
but
monsters.
do what?
You can just kill off people with monsters and no one would be the wiser.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, Dresden time. The, the conversation in Deadbeat that Dresden has with Butters of like how many people just go missing every year. It wasn't centered on a specific location, but monsters need to eat people, apparently. Where do you think the ghouls all live? They probably live in places that have a really high death rate because they're just blending in.
I mean, this country, there's thousands of people who go missing every year. And that's real life.
Mm-hmm. And most of those people probably, like we're saying, are just bouncing and going missing of their own accord, I think. But, urban fantasies are probably just food. They were dinner 3 weeks ago. I'm a little morbid today, sorry.
Yeah, that's what happens when you have lots of people in areas. You just kind of start losing a couple on the outskirts and you don't notice.
Oh, yeah, especially, in more of a lower income, thing where especially police presence or technology isn't as advanced or thick or whatever however you want to say it.
I just had a really weird idea of basically human trafficking for supernatural creatures because it's harder to get food in certain cities.
It's a great idea. It really is.
I gotta work that in somehow.
Oh boy.
Sorry.
Because then you would have this whole like the designer market for human meat, right? So like, oh no, I don't like, insert race. I much prefer insert other race.
Yeah, like in various vampire things, sometimes it's like, oh, they have to like eat clean the entire time, only vegan and stuff in order to taste the best.
Hasn't there? I swear was there a part of Dresden where they drank someone's blood that wasn't healthy?
Dresden took a poison in grave peril, and then the vampires started feeding on him, and they got sick.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, or if you really wanted to go there, you could have this like super racist vampire who's like, no, I'm so tired of, insert racial slur.
Well, if you want to make them really villainous, just make them want children.
Veal, essentially.
Veal burger.
This has something to do with geography.
Can you imagine like the decadent sort of vampire ghoul that's like, no, I want to live in Hawaii, but there's not enough people, so I need to import it from like the Philippines. Go get me my food. This is great.
Then you can have like a travel agent in the States who tricks people into taking these trips to this luxurious resort where they just get eaten.
Oh,
it really reminds me at one point that when Bob was trying to convince Harry to leave Chicago for Lou, I think in grave peril, it's like, I know a thing that possessed a travel agent. Oh my god. I'm sorry, I'm very disorganized today.
I mean, I know there's at least a couple of different like episodes of different shows where, evil, spa starts like eating people or brainwashing people or whatever. It's definitely happened before.
Always.
In my urban fantasy thing, I plan on playing with the idea of ghouls, since in most literature they need to eat humans for whatever reason. But if they're born not made, then you have the situation of like people are still going to have families and they're going to have children, like ghoul children that need to eat on other people. It's very uncomfortable.
Do ghoul children prefer children? Because
I don't know. Maybe there could also be the idea of when you're an adult, maybe you can abstain a bit more, but children have to eat humans. I'm going to have fun with that, moralistically.
You got to figure out what the ghoul version of like Skittles is in terms of human anatomy, just to really
Eyeballs.
make people uncomfortable. Eyeballs, toes. I don't know, the spleen.
Sweetmeats.
disturbing. Does this relate to geography at all?
Yeah, I don't know. Well, like as I've been thinking of ghouls, it's like they have to live in the big cities because that's where they can hide. They're not going to be able to live in a 50-person town in Iowa. They have to live in multi-million population. So, sort of tangentially.
Stories take place in cities often.
Yeah, because that's where shit
Get
happens.
away with anything in a city, and yeah, that's where things happen. That's where people are.
As Dresden has built up, Chicago and the places like it, they're the crossways. There's a whole bunch of symbolic things crossing there. That's why you can get to almost anywhere from Chicago during the
Yeah, I
day.
feel like he drastically overstates Chicago there.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot of cities that are major crossroads in the world.
Yeah, and you can probably do very similar with like LAX or like the ideas of the airports. O'Hare is an international airport. It's a huge airport as well.
Yeah, it's
So
one of the
all of those
biggest in the
places.
country.
Mm-hmm. So Chicago, New York, LA, Miami, probably. Denver a little bit.
Isn't Atlanta the biggest airport in the country?
That's in terms of freight, I think.
Okay.
Yeah, it's up there. I hate Atlanta's airport.
I have never heard anyone who enjoyed going to Atlanta and especially dealing with the airport. Like I know someone who had to go there and they landed on time more or less. It took 2 hours to get to the rental car.
Yeah, I've never done the rental, but I've had a lot of experiences where I land on time and I have like 30 minutes to get across like 6 terminals because of how they've scheduled my flights. I'm like running, like sweat pouring, backpack on, just like, oh God.
There's nothing less fun than getting in at 8 a.m. on an international flight and then waiting for like 45 minutes at the rental counter.
Yeah, it's never fun. Now, another thing you could do if you want to, look at body count is look at places with bad weather. So they could mask their killings by like, oh, they got hit by hail or whatever.
Or diseases.
Diseases, yeah.
Basically go to the third world countries of like, this just, everyone dies all the time. It's normal. Normal-ish.
So is this podcast about why you can just kill people in cities easily?
Apparently. How to get away with murder, high fantasy style.
Set it in a city, and you're already halfway there.
Well, but it would be another good, geographic things. If you don't want to start in a city, like these are some of the challenges you'd have to like figure out how to overcome for these.
Why does it happen? Where
You have a vampire that really wants to live in a tiny town in the middle of nowhere.
It's like retired.
Dracula lived in a castle in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah, how did Dracula feed?
I don't know. Can you just go fly into?
I
don't know. His servants probably bought him food.
Right. Okay, so they went hunting people and no one had the ability to make him stop, essentially.
Yeah. I still haven't finished the Dracula.
Yeah,
But then
I
he goes
think,
to London. That makes more sense. Even
Sure,
when you
London.
start out of a city, you kind of end up in cities anyways.
well, it's just so much easier, especially if you use a real world city where everyone can just kind of go, oh, it's London, big
Yeah.
city. The heft and grandeur of this city is already in our heads. If you go to New York City, Chicago, LA, whatever, it, it's even a lot different if you were to use like a real world city like St. Louis. Even though it's a big city, most people don't have this pre-built mindset of what St. Louis looks like.
Even my pre-built mindset of Chicago never really comes up in Dresden.
Really?
I mean, I
Oh,
picture
sorry, I'm kind of familiar with that. I've lived
I've never
within
been.
an hour of it
No.
before.
But like I picture the giant skyscrapers on the water and lots of wind and
Really dumb looking one in the middle. It kind of looks like Domo. It's just like, dumb looking. I love it.
but like you never really see that scale in Dresden.
So if you're making up a new city, a new, especially big city, how would you go about like creating this heft and grandeur in the reader's minds?
Well, ask Alex how she tries to make a Victorian London that's not London.
I haven't.
Or is it going to be London? It's
Okay,
hard.
The basic, trying to keep the same ideas of like, okay, this is London. It's just going to be called something different, dressed a little bit differently to make sure that like I can get away with the shit I want to change. It's still going to be a huge commerce town because like that's one of the things that London excels at. Is it's got the river, it's got the water, it's all the boats, and the British relied on their navy so much. That's still really important. And then when you have that many people living there, everything else has to be around it in order to support it. Like people need like bread, so you can have a bunch of bakers and they have the routes getting there to bring in grain from the countryside or all of those things to support the industry, at least one industry of say boats or anything else. Basically trade is like the thing you need to have established in order to have a city anywhere. Sometimes it depends on other resources. Like if you're in a desert, it doesn't matter where the trade is going. It goes where water is.
Right. Yeah, and that's one of those reasons why, like, in a big city, you don't have to explain anything. They're blacksmiths. Well, it's a big city. You just need it. If you go with like a small city or like even a settlement or trading outpost, you're like, well, water. The options get a lot more limited because especially outposts and stuff, everything revolves around water. It almost, unless there's some kind of magical means to say that doesn't matter.
Yeah, I mean, anything can be hand waved. Just these things need to be explained at some point. If you're going to say no one needs water because they make their own or something, who fucking cares? You just need to kind of establish that in order to get away with it.
Right. And then you got to like look at, well, at least because I mostly write sci-fi, then you have this whole other thing to deal with of you want like single climate biodomes and how does that affect things? Because if you read a lot of sci-fi, what ends up happening is each planet is defined by one city on the planet.
And one biome.
In one biome, a lot of times. So it ends up being just a city on another continent if you thought of it as one world. Or they just have to, you very rarely see multiple climate types on one planet because you really only see one city.
It's a huge flaw in a lot of sci-fi, in my opinion. Is that?
Well, I agree completely, and it's one of the things I try very hard not to do, but I get why it happens.
You can get away from that whole issue if you keep things more in like space stations. Like, so space station is basically a huge city.
Biome.
Yeah, there's no biome. You do have to worry about atmosphere.
Space stations have their own things of like, okay, well, what are we going to hand wave? How are we going to do water? How are we going to do air? How are we going to do gravity, etc.?
Yeah, the gravity is always the one that throws me. Like, how do you actually explain artificial gravity?
We generate it via a machine that I'm going to call this Gizmo.
Right. Or in
Unless everything is
Artemis,
spinning, it doesn't make sense.
right? In Artemis, there's actually a thing called the Gizmo. But they do just have moon gravity. That's one thing I did like about that book. It's, the Andy Weir, however you say his name, guy who wrote The Martian. So everything takes place on the moon, so he uses just like moon gravity and does a good job of explaining how that would affect like architecture and design decisions in terms of buildings if you only had 1/6 gravity.
Then everybody's super weak.
Yeah, they talked about that, how like the main character, since she was born on the moon, could never go to Earth because she would die.
Interesting.
Mm.
Honor Harrington series, they talked about like there's basically 3 planets in the Manticorn systems, and one of them has like 1.4, 1.6 Earth gravity. So she was always like a bit stronger than others, and when she worked out, she wanted to up the gravity in the workout room, and everyone else would hate her.
Yeah, that's another thing you can deal with like geography and locations is prerequisites for living in each area that a character might have to overcome or deal with to go from place to place.
Like the Aiel and Wheel of Time are from a desert and get panicked when they see moving water.
Because they're not used to it.
Because it doesn't exist where they're from. I think one of the characters walks in on someone in the bath and is just like, "Oh my God, are you drowning?"
What happens if you throw them in a lake?
They'll probably kill you afterwards.
They can't be afraid of water. They understand how important it is. Why not just enjoy it?
But they could be afraid of large bits of water. I mean, that makes a lot of sense, actually. Like, if you're not used to seeing it, seeing all of it at once could be very freaky.
Yeah, I can see that.
I'm just feeling very cool. It's like, I want to, throw them in a puddle, like a pond, and then like get bigger and bigger. I'm just getting weird tangents in my head now. And throw them in the Pacific Ocean.
Why do you want to torture everybody?
Because she's mean. That's why. She's a jerk.
I don't have like... We're not very well prepared for this particular episode, so I'm just kind of wandering instead of having like a list that I need to go down.
Yeah, no, Director Alex wants to murder people. That's why.
And stab them, don't forget.
And stab them, yes.
I was going to say earlier about even when you don't start in cities, in the case of Wheel of Time, they are a bunch of farm boys. They're a bunch of farm boys, and then by the end of the first book, they're in major cities, and then the rest of the books basically just become a tour of all the cities in the world.
It's just so much easier.
Where things happen.
Yeah, there's just a lot of stuff you don't have to deal with if you are in a big city.
Cities have a lot of benefits.
Which bothers me.
Of how many characters you can get. 'Cause, like, you can have the really rich people, you can have really poor people, everyone in between. So it's as it is in real life, it's just like the fulcrum of where things happen.
Right. Well, obviously, and I get why everything is there, but people, like, I don't know, maybe as just a kid from the middle of America, I feel underrepresented in my stories.
Are there any good stories not set in, like, just set in backwater places?
Hatchet?
Haven't read it.
It was a story of a kid who got lost in the woods.
Oh, right. Yeah, that one.
I mean, if you want to go to some TV, like Justified is pretty good, and it's set in, somewhere in nowhere, the South, or like somewhere in like Tennessee or something, I think.
Like, I feel like, is there any fantasy stories that? I mean, there must be. I guess what's it called? The Chronicles of Prydain. Pridewayne.
Prydain?
Prydain. Uh, he never
I've not
really.
read it.
Oh, I love that series, but he never really goes to the cities. He's always in between them. When he's even in, if he ever goes to cities at all, really.
True Blood series kind of comes to mind. If it takes place in tiny towns, and it just really stretches the imagination as to why.
Exactly.
Because it's like, what are all those important people doing there? And then sometimes they do go to big cities. Just like, really? You care about that tiny town in Louisiana?
Aren't they vampires?
Vampires, werewolves, tigers, shit like
Do
that.
they need to feed on people?
Vampires do.
Where do they find enough people in a little town?
Well, they had like fake blood. That was one of the things about True Blood. Now that there was fake blood available, they can come out of the coffin, and be vegan.
I'm glad I never watched the show then.
The show's actually pretty funny.
Is it supposed to be funny?
Yeah, they did a really good job of making it. Like I watched a couple of seasons and it was pretty good. And then the books.
I heard the books got super weird.
Well, it's just kind of like fizzled because basically half of it is Sookie cleaning her house. I'm carrying. Yeah, no, I'm not kidding. Like they're the Southernly people that's like, so presentation is everything, and they like, okay, there's like vampires and someone's gonna die and I have to save them, and telepathy, I have to clean my house. And then all of the like string of boyfriends, like, okay, a vampire and then another vampire and then a were-tiger and then another vampire. It's just like,
what is she?
She's a part fairy human.
Okay. Yeah, the only thing I really know about that show is Deborah Ann Wall is in it.
Which one's she?
You probably recognize her. Jessica Hamby is who she plays.
Oh, Jessica. Yeah, she was okay.
But yeah, she's in the Netflix Daredevil, and that's where I know her from. Everyone's like, "Oh, she's in True Blood." I'm like, "Oh, I've never seen that show."
She did pretty good job with the character she was given, which is kind of dumb teenager vampire. The people who executed True Blood, the show, did a pretty good job, but they had not a great series to work with in terms of the full overarching story.
So is there a reason it takes place in a small town in Louisiana?
Because she decided it takes place in Louisiana.
Why not New Orleans? New Orleans sounds like a perfect city for that kind
of stuff. They go to New Orleans once in a while, but because that's where Sookie was, and then Bill, and then people are drawn to that area, and then Were-Panthers.
Were-Panthers.
What?
Yeah.
I feel like this is just about why your story should be in a city, because there's really not good reasons not to be.
Well, I feel like there could be. I just can't remember any ones that did it well.
I mean, even Game of Thrones is a hell of a lot of traveling outside of cities.
Right.
They're always trying
to. It also really depends on time period, right?
Yeah.
You know, if you're doing, because if you wanted to set like a Western, you know, a traditional Western, you would have smaller towns.
Dodge City was still a city. It's in the name. Because it's still like, okay, it's the sheriff versus the bad guy. And like the sheriff's only to be in a place where there are people.
Well, obviously, but you don't have to have it be in a big city. It could be, you know, little itty bitty city with like 12 buildings.
That's not a city.
It's relative. You know, those 12 buildings are certainly bigger than the one building 10 miles away. And then like nothing for another 100 miles, you know.
I feel like in that case the Western setting is the city.
I could agree with that. Yeah, there is certain like the set, you know, the entire area is the city. So you have like the pastures and the farms, and it just kind of sprawls forever.
In that case, I can kind of argue that every setting you put a story in is a city in some way. I feel like it just the connotation of why your story is where it is very stretched definition of a city.
Almost all stories have to do with people versus other people, right? So those people, they're going to be in cities when they interact with each other because that's where the majority of people are.
Then there's man versus nature.
Right.
Yes, but those are not the most stories that we see.
True.
Certainly not in fantasy or even sci-fi, not really.
Yeah, for
The
sure.
Martian is pretty much the only one that you can get that doesn't take place in a city. And even then, everything that happened on Earth was in a gigantic city because that's where they had the spaceships.
You in maybe not a city per se, but like you do get a lot of sci-fi and like the 12-person crew kind of thing.
Yeah.
So you get that might be an exception. But it's much more like man versus environment or man versus alien kind of man versus
There's a lot
external
of
threat.
man versus man on the. A lot of times,
Event Horizon. It's like, okay,
like,
you got both.
when you isolate a small group of humans on a spaceship like that, you kind of make them turn against each other.
Yeah, and if you have reasons to lock the 12 people you need in your tiny little town in a room, sure, you could do that. You have to build in those reasons as to why everything that's important happens in a tiny area. And if anything is larger than one house or room, then you run out of space.
Though I feel like if your readers are sitting back and wondering why your story is taking place where it is, your story is not interesting enough.
Yeah, location and plot do need to interconnect and feel organic between the two of them.
Yeah.
I cannot think of a fantasy story that took place in a small town.
Does a castle full of students count as a small town?
You mean Hogwarts? No.
Yes,
that's a big town.
Every year there's, here's another 10 new students that you've never met before.
Hey, it's a big school.
It is.
I went to a pretty small university, and I definitely met people like my senior year who had been there every year I was there. Never met them before.
I went to a really small high school. There's like 250 students tops.
In the school?
In the school, yeah.
Oh, I was a class of like 340 or something. There was almost 1,000 kids in my high school at one point.
I think I was a class of about 40, 45.
It's weird because my high school now is, my town has gone to, we had 3 elementary schools. One's closed. Still have 2, but now 7th and 8th grade are at the high school. And it's like just, my brother is a year older than me. Him and my classes were like the biggest classes they've had. And now there's just like no one. It just shrunk. And now we don't know what to do with all those buildings.
Ooh, that could be a very interesting setting. A dying city. So you have all these like abandoned buildings, and so essentially
There's
Detroit.
abandoned buildings in every big city. Look at Dresden. He always finds a warehouse to duke it out in that no one's been in.
Right, but I mean like one city that was once flourishing is now constricting for various reasons.
That's always fun.
Yeah, and those reasons are usually not very happy. So conflict right there.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I mean, you look at like boomtowns and stuff that existed for a very finite reason, and
then when the boomtown goes away, they become boot camp for new wardens. Sorry,
I was going to ask,
way too easy.
Like, how often is Dresden out of Chicago? He goes
At one point, apparently, he went to Oklahoma. There was a tornado chasing them.
I mean, where was Ebenezer?
Yeah, and apparently, like Kelly told me he was
Ozark.
up in a Sooner, and I was not happy with that.
Say again?
Like the one where he goes to Oklahoma, like there's for some reason the University of Oklahoma is in there, and I was not a fan of that because I don't like OU. Like I will probably never read that story because of OU.
I'm not sure which story it is. It was something that was briefly mentioned.
Is it going to be in briefcases?
I don't know. I don't think.
I think it was the Bigfoot one.
I have never read any of the Bigfoot ones, so I don't know those.
I want a Dresden book that doesn't take place in Chicago.
I don't know if that will happen, honestly,
The
because
entire book doesn't take
Yes.
place in Chicago. Yeah, that's probably never gonna happen.
I know.
You
Butcher
never.
has said that the next few books will be in Chicago.
I could have said that without him knowing.
It's pretty easy. It is the location.
And now he's got Demon Reach. It's like he's very stuck there.
That counts as Chicago. Yeah. You do kind of tie yourself to a location.
Yeah.
Either
I
that
mean-
or you literally just float in the water and don't ever stay in one place.
I have read series that the Caliandro series by Rob Thurman. It starts in New York and they always go back to New York. But there was an entire book that was essentially a road trip. It worked. It was great having 5 supernatural people stuck in a car together. Yeah, it was kind of fun, but people tend to get centered on one area unless they're weirdly nomadic. That just no, this is home. This is where I go back to. So it's normal.
That's a very human thing to not want to move too much. And that's something I've seen, because I have moved across the country and lived in a bunch of different areas. But for the majority of people, moving more than 2 or 3 hours away from where they're born is just unthinkable.
A lot of it has to do with family ties and family support. And a lot of times if they want to move 3,000 miles away, it could be because they're running away from family.
It's very true.
It's probably because they want to get away from family.
And I have moved a whole lot. It's just if you're trying to build stability, then you need to. Yeah. Where were you born and how far away from it right now?
Well, I was born in Boston, about an hour away. But the house I grew up in. Sorry, the house I grew up in is the house I'm in right now. But the house I was born into is about 10 minutes that way. I was there till I was about 2.5, 3. Then we lived in a rental for 6 months, and then we built this house.
It's a little foreign to me because I moved around so much.
The idea of moving around is so confusing to me.
Yeah, I'm at my 32nd address.
Oh my god! I mean, I have been to college in Germany and Boston, and in terms of living, but
yeah. So you've traveled. You've gone to Ireland several times. You're going back to England, and
I
it's
was
just
in Boston for 3 years.
To compare. I've never been outside the country, but I've lived in 7 states.
Never been out of the country.
Mm.
Oh man!
And so it's weird to think of having one place for so long. The longest I've ever lived anywhere was 5 years.
Yeah, it's something we were talking about, me and my wife were just last night, of how a lot of times in television shows, whenever the main character goes back to their family, their room is still just the way it was in high school. I'm like,
what are you talking about? I don't have a room.
I don't have a room. What is this? What are you talking about?
They have all those.
Look at this room as mine. I've gotten bounced around rooms in this house.
In TV shows, they have that this is where all the heights were recorded all throughout their growing up. It's what the fuck are you talking about? That doesn't happen.
What about season 5 of Buffy, when magic happens and she has a sister? Where did a room in the house for a sister come from?
Magic, man, magic.
Are you not familiar with that?
No, I didn't watch much of Buffy because I didn't like Buffy.
In season 5 of Buffy, she gets a sister that's 18.
Yeah, just randomly.
Yep. She all of a sudden has a sister because of magic, actually, really. A magical key was turned into a woman, and there was just a magic hand wave behind the scenes of magic that everyone suddenly completely acknowledged that she has a sister.
Yep.
I never cared for Joss Whedon.
But was there just an empty room in the house, an office or something?
Could be.
Maybe, I guess.
But there's a really bad thing, especially in television, of how the city just sort of expands as it's needed, and the next thing you know, it's like a fucking metropolis, even though it started out as this like little Midwestern town.
That's one thing about TV shows, and they say, "Oh, this is a really tiny town." It's like, dude, you have a Walmart. That's not tiny.
Yeah, that's like they want to make an episode about this, so that has to be there, even though there's no reason for something like that to be in this.
If there's constantly someone that you don't know, you're not in a tiny town.
Yeah. Like, well, yeah. I mean, small town maybe, but not tiny.
I have lived in a town that was so small that basically everyone says, "You have a shotgun, right?" Because the bears are going to come out in spring. And yet the bear did try to break into the house, and we didn't have a shotgun. And then conversely, I've lived in really large cities as well. It's weird. Both of them.
Yeah, it's just the guy next door that's going to break into the house. Someone's always going to try to break into the house. Yeah, I live in a town with 20,000 people, and someone tried to break into my house.
Hey, it's big enough for a Walmart. Shut up.
There's a Walmart like 3 towns over.
Well, yeah, but you got to understand, like, in the Northeast, like, towns just sit on top of each other.
Yeah, there's no real, like, there's lines on a map somewhere.
Yeah.
But the town
like,
just covers
technically
the whole area.
speaking, the Walmart I go to most days is, like, 5 towns away. But it's 6-7 miles, maybe.
To be fair, I live on a man-made island peninsula thing. So, like, the Walmart kind of serves the entire Cape. All 10, 12 towns, whatever it is.
I just realized another thing about cities that is really helpful when you're trying to establish why people go there and go away or whatever. Colleges.
Mm-hmm. Universities, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
In that, you could always do a very interesting juxtaposition of big university in a little town.
Well, that basically just becomes the university is the town.
Essentially, but you could always work on it to where you have this whole thing of, yes, sure, the university is thriving, but you could have a perspective from outside the university of this small town that's really struggling.
In my experience, that small town may not be struggling much just because the university people are going to leave campus at some point and go eat somewhere. It's a huge industry of just supporting college students.
So, for instance,
wonderful when you're looking for cheap food.
I went to UMass Amherst. Amherst is a small town of 37,000 people. The university is 30,000 people, students. I'm actually surprised there's 37,000 people in Amherst. That's like there's a street with some shops on it.
When I first moved to Stillwater,
that is such a small town name.
Yes, I think there was like 12,000 permanent residents in the city. Like when I say, I mean, it's a small town, but there was 27,000 college kids.
Yeah, that's to be the pizza shop owner.
I mean, it's growing now, but it's one of those things where it's hard to make. It's actually really hard to be there just by the university. You know, because if you're not working for the university, you're probably not getting paid all that well. So especially when I first moved there, if you weren't working for the university, the level of the quality of life was pretty low for people not employed by the university because there wasn't a lot of other business there.
It's like a weird form of boomtown with its specialized thing.
There's a third type of location for city building. You've got trade, education, and tourism.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Which is the entirety of the entire thing I live on is all because it has beaches.
Dubai.
Yeah, well, Dubai is, I mean, that's a whole other weird thing.
Dubai is weird to hear about because it it's trying to attract the tourists, so people like, yeah, let's go to this exotic place with really pretty buildings and party, but it's still an Islamic State area, so
They're
they,
also trying to attract business.
yes,
Yeah.
but they do not take kindly to alcohol or
Mhm.
promiscuity.
Right, yeah. I'm sad that I know this, but an entire Sex and the City movie was based around that.
What?
Look,
Really?
yeah, I think it was the second one. They go to Dubai, and it's all about these, like, really slutty
Was
women.
this one?
Huh?
Did they all end up in jail? Is that how it ended?
They were, if I remember right, they were essentially run out of town.
Oh, so they got the better treatment.
Yeah.
Because there've been a lot of stories of people like getting thrown in jail for doing things that they thought they were allowed to do because they went to Dubai, and they thought it was a party city. And if all these fancy hotels that they're trying to build and bring in tourism and stuff, they're also not like building the city in a decent way. So you're trying to just go across the street. It'll take you an hour and 4 different like detours. I've heard.
Was someone? Was it Jacob telling us about like he had to cross the street and there was like a major highway?
Huh?
I can't remember what that was. Just like every day they had to leave their hotel and they had to cross this extremely busy like 5-lane highway. And that was just like the start of, to do anything you had to walk across this highway.
I have no idea what you're talking about.
Okay, maybe it wasn't this podcast then.
But yes, I was right. It was Sex and the City 2, where they go to Dubai.
What writer sat down and thought about let's do that?
Well, sorry, Abu Dhabi, according to Wikipedia.
Oh, that might be a bit different.
But that's still UAE.
Mm-hmm.
So
Then again, I'm often wondering how people sat down and came up with these ideas.
drink heavily and
Probably some amount of cocaine.
Well, I'd wonder, like, in love.
Probably what happened is, hey, the tourism board of so-and-so really wants to pay for this, so make it happen. That's how a lot of those decisions get done.
Fair enough.
Product placement, man.
Oh, yeah. I mean, if I were writing a book and Pepsi was like, we really want the main character to love Pepsi, I'm like, sure, done. No problem.
Community did it best with all their product placement. They made Subway a character.
That was really funny.
Mm-hmm.
I've been really enjoying the show Superstore.
I know. It's so good.
That's not Walmart.
That's not Walmart.
So what other reasons or why stories need to take place in cities?
I was going to ask, is there a way we can justify not taking place in a city?
Well, I mean, city, I guess size of city, could change things. Like if it's a touristy location, you still get like the cross section of people.
I feel like a lot of times when stories don't start in cities, it's because they want their main character to be that bumbling, inexperienced person. So when they go to the city, then you can go, ooh, and the Oz, and everything's so big and shiny, and there's so many people.
Right, but I often feel like that they don't portray that super well. It's just like, look, just because they have never been there doesn't mean they're stupid.
I guess they did that. He does. Jordan does that in Wheel of Time. Like they get to the first big city they go to after leaving their little farm, and it's like, wow, this small little inn is the size of the inn in our town that we grew up in.
Mm-hmm.
And then they get to the actual main city that's like 10 times the size of the little city they were at, and they're no longer thinking like they're now comparing things to that small city, and very quickly they just kind of completely lose touch with the small farm they grew up on.
Yeah, that seems normal.
Yeah.
Your reference points get blown way out of whatever you're aware of. And so it's just like, oh, okay.
Yeah, sometimes fantasy stories, like you'll have a person 10 books later who grew up in a small town in a city, and it's like they're not going to continuously compare things to the small town anymore.
No. I mean, I can compare. Like I compare the differences between where I live now versus Oklahoma City or Tulsa or Stillwater, fucking Kingsford. There's all sorts of ways to compare, but it's not something I'm constantly doing.
And then Jordan does the opposite and has a character who grew up in a fishing city. 30 years later, every single thing she says is a fishing metaphor. Even though she's so far disconnected from that life that it just really wouldn't.
See, that I can buy a little bit, because there are definitely some phrases and other things, idioms that I use that are very specific to like this little pocket I grew up in. Like no one else I've ever talked to knows them, but like my family uses them like crazy. So like I can see that happening because it's just how you talk, and the first probably 15 years of your life will affect how you talk a lot. Yeah, especially with idioms.
80% of my conversations with my brothers are Simpsons references. It's just what we grew up watching. My parents are always confused when we're all together. Even my birthday card this year was a Simpsons reference.
Yeah, there's just so many referential things that you just miss when you live in a different location.
Oh yeah, it was your birthday recently, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Happy birthday! I just remembered that.
Thank you, guys. Okay. It was a card that had Ogdenville, North Haverbrook, and Brockville. The monorail episode when getting the monorail in the town put them on the map. In reference to this podcast episode content.
I was hoping it'd be like, I choose not to be around you on your birthday.
That's so mean.
But it's funny. So pretty much we've established you have to be in a city.
Because we can't imagine not being in a city. Even...
Okay, someone pull up an example of not being in a city.
If you're doing human versus human.
Yeah.
Because if you're doing like human versus environment, then, there may not be another human.
Yeah. But it's like, if anything, it's like, if your story has people, multiple, where are they going to meet? Probably in a city.
Right. You see a lot of like that kind of sort of disparate, spread out kind of thing in like post-apocalyptic. So it's more of a travel log where like you find these little pockets of people. I don't know if you call them cities or like camps or whatever, but that's that's one genre where you see a much smaller. Even man versus human versus human, but tends to be more of like a extended chase kind of idea.
But those places will be cities eventually.
Eventually,
I mean, recovering from an apocalypse tends to.
Where you go to find canned food, you go to the city.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm gonna write a book that takes place inside like a Walmart during the zombie apocalypse.
Summer night.
Oh yeah, was that early?
Summer night. That's when they had to fight at Walmart.
With the what's he called?
The plant monster.
Yeah.
Chlorofiend.
Okay, it was Chlorofiend. I was gonna say like zombie stories often become how do I get out of the city?
Yeah.
Because there's too many people.
Apocalypse did it fairly well.
Yeah.
I haven't read it yet. It's on my shelf of books. Sorry.
Yeah, that is a good point. Like a lot of destruction movies is all about getting away from the city, away from the people, or away from the coast. If it's
so,
like
in those situations,
where most people live.
Starts in the city and then you go away from it versus other things that go out from the city into it. Cities are important.
Yes.
Yeah. So if you want to be lazy, just set your story in New York City and you can make it all up from there. Because even as like we saw, like especially like in Friends, or even Friends, Seinfeld, How I Met Your Mother, they're all like in this giant city that you see like itty bitty part of, like this much.
They could all coexist in the same story.
Yeah, they could
And you wouldn't
easily.
know it.
You know, so you can create these fictional little suburb, neighborhoods in these giant cities, and everyone's just okay with it because it's a giant city. It could work.
I just read a story in the Post about a woman who lived in, I think it was Greenwich Village, for 28 something a month in rent.
Mm-hmm.
She'd been living there since the 60s.
Oh, rent
And she
controlled.
just passed away, yeah. And it was like someone bought it in like 2003, and then like the most he could up her rent in a year was like $1.20.
Wow.
So until she passed away, she was living in downtown Manhattan at very little money.
Did they say like what the rent went up to? It's got to be like $4 or $5 grand if it was nice.
No, they haven't sold it yet. It needs a lot of work.
Yeah, if one tenant for that long, they probably need to do a huge
Yeah.
update.
But still, I mean, it's going to be worth so much.
So
money.
those rent-controlled apartments in downtown New York do exist
They're just really hard to find.
because I don't know how you could find that.
Yeah, I remember one company was wanting me to move there, and I was like, "You want me to live where? For how much? How small of an apartment for how many thousands of dollars a month?" It was like a 700, 800 square foot apartment for like $3,500 a month.
Mm-mm.
Like,
That's one.
I got a
that's
3-bedroom
the big
house
thing.
for $850.
That's the big thing that's bad about big cities of just like they've got so many people in such a tiny space.
Which
Costs.
no one
Yes, and
ever
expenses
talks
that.
about. Like, there's no way. Well, granted, they hand wave at least Monica and Rachel's place in Friends as being rent controlled. But like, How I Met Your Mother, no way in hell those fuckers are affording that it's like an $8,000 a month apartment.
There was another Post article that compared apartment sizes in Manhattan and what reality would cost, and none of those shows. I think what's the show? Girls, I think it is, was like the utter fantasy of what she could have afforded. It was like the worst offender, but even like Seinfeld, Seinfeld probably could make money, but
Seinfeld was also, I mean, granted, things were expensive during that show, but not as bad as they are now.
true.
Like, it's been a real sort of exponential climb up.
Yeah, Ted's apartment was fucking huge.
Yeah, 2 bedrooms, 1 bath. Yeah, it was huge. Stupid. It was at least they tried in Friends to hand wave it like, oh, it's rent control. Monica's grandmother who now lives in Florida.
Yeah,
Just give me something. Give me a
Seinfeld's
little
apartment's
fucking
not
real.
huge.
Huh?
Seinfeld's apartment's not huge.
No, it's like a 1 bedroom.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, it's.
I mean, it's probably expensive, but he could afford it.
Oh yeah, I mean, he bought his dad a Cadillac. I mean, come on, he could afford it. I just watched that episode, so
I love that show. Yeah,
I don't know if I'm gonna finish it. I'm trying, but
set your characters in a city and then hand wave where they live away, because it's impossible to actually put a person in a livable apartment at a livable wage.
What I did for mine is that okay, she's gonna have a really, really tiny apartment because she's a waitress at 19 years old.
How does Penny afford her apartment?
Who?
What the hell?
that's Big Bang Theory. Yeah, that's
There's 4 people living. Is it all 4 people? No, it's just the 2 of them, Sheldon and what's his name, Leonard.
right, but they have real jobs.
They have real jobs. She's a waitress at Cheesecake Factory.
Right. That is something that actually comes up a lot, is like, how the fuck does she afford that? Either that or it's a cheap apartment and Leonard and Sheldon are just banking.
To be fair, the elevator has never been fixed, so
Yeah, that's true.
it's probably a really cheap rundown.
And, it is around a university, so maybe it's sort of like that like weird student bubble where things are cheaper. But you don't get anything for it. Like the super
Really?
doesn't fix anything, pretty much.
Urban fantasy main character's apartment's like 400 square feet.
Nice.
I drew this out. I figured I was like, this is exactly as much as she could possibly need or afford.
Yeah, my my older brother and his wife, when they moved to Jersey, their apartment was like 387 square feet. It was super tiny. And I've seen it. I've seen what a really small apartment looks like.
Oh God. Yeah, I wish I could take my college apartment and just like put it in Boston at that cost. That'd be nice.
Yeah, like I had my first apartment was smaller, but it was also in Stillwater, Oklahoma, so it was like $500 a month for a 2-bedroom.
Yeah, it was $600 a month for 1 bedroom. That was larger than my living room, but it was nice. So, set your story in the city. Don't explain how your main character can afford where he lives, because it's just...
Or do, because that's one thing I enjoy about Dresden, is the fact that, like, I can't afford to live anywhere nicer than this tiny thing that barely...
boarding house.
Yeah. If you explain it and why it works, like...
Just, yeah, character is underdog.
Mm-hmm. Or, you know...
There was an apartment...
My parents were really rich and died and left me a ton of money. Your character doesn't have to be poor.
This is true.
It just creates, you know, if the character is poor, it creates a bigger rooting interest
and sympathy.
But we do love Batman, so.
Carl, I'm sorry, I'm thinking your joke.
Oh,
what travels down an alley and has holes in it?
My parents.
God, no.
These are the fun things you get to see if you are a patron and hang out on our Discord.
Have you ever seen
very inappropriate memes about Bruce Wayne's parents?
Have you seen the one with him on the phone?
Which one?
When he's on the phone and he answers it as Batwayne. Fuck, wait, no. Shit, no.
No, I haven't seen that one.
Oh, that one's good. I think I just sent it to my brother not long ago, so I can send it to you. There it is.
Important conversations happening now.
Oh, yeah. And we didn't even get to, like, some fun stuff of, like, you know, people, like, see inland versus oceans, and there's all sorts of fun crap you can get into.
The facial expressions in that comic that make it for me.
I'll have to read it afterwards.
Because this is an auditory podcast, and looking at memes actually doesn't do anything for the conversation.
Hey, I could totally throw it.
If you're inland, are you on a river, basically? For cities?
Yeah, you have to be around water pretty much.
Yeah, I mean, it depends on the time period.
Or you could basically just be, this is as far as we can go into the mountains. We're going to stop here because then that's Denver. It's just like, oh yeah, we were following the trail everyone else does. I ain't going over that hill. Just stop here. Denver.
Yeah, that does happen.
So you're a traveling stop city?
Yeah.
Those exist. They did. Well, they existed. Now they're just there.
Mm-hmm. Right. Or the whole, we're doing this to, oh, what am I trying to think? Like the city where people stop for the winter kind of idea. So that's why that city is there. It's sort of tourism, but like you can't pass the mountains, and then you have this natural barrier and conflict and that kind of crap.
Yep. So it's pretty much either weather or water. That's where you're going to be.
Or space. Okay, well, I think we've exhausted our abilities, unless we just want to get really far out there. So thanks for coming out. Check us out, brokenjars.xyz, patreon.com/brokenjars. I am Jacob, as always. You can find me on Twitter at Jacob Ingalls. I am also on Great Scott and SimTalk. If you want to find me on other podcasts, Colin is a slacker. He's not on anything else. Director Alex
is a recluse.
Is on the Dresden Files.
If you really like the Dresden references, that's the other place I do those.
Where I
And it
can't-
actually has a purpose.
Well, we appreciate you coming out, and we will see y'all next time.